What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I'm going to share the number one place you need to be looking for in the wintertime for bass. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start by explaining what these areas look like using this drawn down image on Sam Rayburn Reservoir in Texas. And this will give you a good idea in your mind of what this looks like in real life, and then we'll go to some other lake types to break it down even further. But basically, this is a drain or a ditch area. And if we take a look at this, you can see that this lake is drawn below normal pool. So if we go up to a normal pool, there is water covering this normally. But now that we're at a low pool, you can see it's exposed. And this right here is the drainer ditch. And then this is the drainer ditch on the CMAP mapping here. Again, a drainer ditch right here and then right here. It's basically an old creek channel that's cutting into a flat. And what these fish are going to do is they're going to be setting up in and around this drain or ditch. So it's going to be setting up right in here. Now, they're not always going to be right in the dead center of that drain or ditch. A lot of times when they're inactive, they will be, and they'll be sitting right on the bottom where you need to graph them with 2D sonar to actually pick them off the bottom. And then if you can drop a bait down there and you see it on forward facing, you might see the whole bottom come up off the bottom and come try to eat your bait. And other times, if you don't have forward facing sonar, you can drop down there with like old 2D sonar, vertical fishing, or just cast and catch fish. But basically, these fish a lot of times will be setting up in the actual middle of this ditch on the bottom of the lake in anywhere from 20 to 50 feet of water, depending on how clear your lake is. But then as conditions change, let's say it gets really sunny and warm and the air temperatures are warm, the surface of the water starts heating up, the bait fish can rise up and the fish will rise up. And they might be in the middle of this drain or ditch floating and they're just sitting a few feet under the surface. And this is how a lot of guys used to catch them on Alabama rigs back in the day when those were legal, or you can catch them now on a jig head minnow kind of using forward-facing sonar. But also there are some fish that'll pull out of these drains or ditches onto these flats at the same time, and they'll set up around wooded cover or any type of cover that gives them shade, like stumps, brush piles, especially even like rock, old house foundations on the edges of these ditches that are up here in anywhere from, let's say, 10 to 30 feet of water, again, depending on the depth you're fishing and the clarity of the lake you're on. So these are the types of areas you're looking for, and this is what they look like on a contour map. And so if you can find these on your fishery, you can have a really good chance of finding groups of fish. Now, I will say that there are a lot of drains or ditches in these areas, so you may have to graph 15 to 30 of them at times to find a group of fish. So you go into this drain and then this drain and then this drain, and there's so many of them. And a lot of times they'll even have grass in these drains, like here on Sam Rayburn, which makes it even more difficult because it's hard to see them with a fish finder. So you have to then fish through these drains with different baits. But if you don't have grass, you can usually graph them with 2D and down imaging. But you may have to graph or look through, again, 15 to 30 drains to find a group of fish. But when you find them, you might find, again, 30 to 60 fish in one of these drains and absolutely load the boat. And you have to just kind of play it by ear depending on where the fish are in the middle of the drain or on the edges or up on the flat up here. But when you find a good one, it's pretty obvious because your screen's just going to light up with a bunch of fish and a bunch of different things on the screens. You'll be able to pretty easily see that there are fish there. Now, if we go to a few different lakes, let me switch here real quick. Okay, there we go. So let's take a look at some maybe off-the-wall lake types that you might not expect to have drains and ditches. This is Old Hickory Lake over in Tennessee, and if we look at this lake, it kind of sets up more like a river system, but even these types of fisheries are going to have these drains and ditches as you lead back into some of these major creeks in here. You can actually see these creek channels very clearly, but this is more of what I would consider a creek channel. It's not necessarily a drain or a ditch. Instead, the drain or the ditch is going to be in an area, for example, like this, where you have a small little depression leading into this flat. That would be what I would consider a drain or a ditch. It's very, very small and subtle. There's another one that kind of cuts in right here. You can see the hard channel cuts in, and that drain or ditch just cuts in right in here. It's not super obvious. Another one over here, it cuts in and then cuts around this corner. And you're always going to find these drains or ditches basically between two higher pieces of structure. So there's like a high point right here, and then you're going to have this island. And then there's a nice creek channel over here, but this could be where you find those fish in this drain and ditch. And because Old Hickory is such a shallow, muddy fishery, 1 to 2 foot of visibility, this ditch is perfectly deep enough to hold a bunch of fish. It's in 10, 12, 15 feet of water. That's more than deep enough. So you don't necessarily need to find these drains and ditches out there in 20, 30 feet. If you can find some shallower ones at times, those can even be better. Here's another example. You have this creek that kind of feeds in and then all of a sudden creates a deeper depression back here behind this island. This is just as effective of a little drain or ditch to hold a bunch of fish, and they'll just set up right in the middle of that thing on the bottom, suspended around. That's the stuff I'm looking for. So kind of a non-traditional area technically. One thing I will say is though, because this lake probably has a lot of non-bass species, again, you'll have drum, catfish, things like that, you may have to run more than 15 or 20 of these areas to find the spot that's holding fish. You may have to run 30 or 40 of them, but they're going to be fish setting up in these areas. These are areas that take a lot of time, patience, and repetition to find these fish in, but if you can go through enough of them with your electronics or just kind of fishing through them if there's grass and cover there, you will eventually get bit because you're finding these giant groups of fish most of the time, 20 to 50, 60 fish. It's not going to be a one fish here, one fish there type of deal. So when you get around them, you're going to know. And that's why I say it's the number one place to look, because it's going to be the best fishing you're going to have all winter, but it's not the easiest place to fish. There are other videos I'll make about like easy limit areas or easy places to catch fish in the winter. These are not easy areas to find fish in. They're just really, really good when you do find them. Really quick, guys, if you enjoy the content on Bass Fishing Declassified, you'll definitely like the lake breakdowns we offer at fishthemoment.com. These breakdowns provide different looks at your lake and give you 40 detailed waypoints on areas to fish, whether you're fishing shallow, northern lakes, or offshore. These breakdowns are by season, so you can pick a season and then go and find your lake here, and you're going to get detailed instructions on the conditions, the baits, and the strategies to employ on these different waypoints to put you around the fish every single time you head to the lake. Definitely check out these lake breakdowns at fishthemoment.com. Okay, there we go. So we got Center Hill Lake pulled up here now, and this lake is a lot steeper in its banks. It's very deep in the center. I mean, the center of this lake is 150 feet deep, and so you don't have those really nice expansive flats like we saw on the last two examples. And because of this, I'm not necessarily going to be looking for these flatter areas and things like that out here just because it's so deep. I still want to be looking for fish that are setting up on the bottom, or at least have the option to get down to the bottom. And so what I'm going to do on these types of fisheries instead is go basically as far back into these creeks as I possibly can and try to find areas where the drains or ditches are not so deep that the fish can't actually set up on the bottom. So back in this little creek here, if we go all the way back in here, you'll notice that there are a few drains or ditches right here and right here where the bottom of the lake is 40 to 50 feet deep. And on really clear bodies of water, 40 to 50 feet of water is not too deep for bass to set up in. And there's a lot of fish that set up right on the bottom in 40 to 50 feet. Now you need to be careful when you're fishing this deep 40 to 50 feet of water, because you will have to fizz fish if you bring them up really quickly from that deep of water. They'll fill up with air and you'll need to use a fizz needle or at least put them in your live well for a bit and put some fin clips until they kind of stabilize and you can let them back down. But if you don't want to do that, then I wouldn't recommend fishing this deep, but it is a very effective way to fish. And you want to find these ditches or drains that are, I would say, the deepest 70 feet deep. I've caught them off the bottom in 70 foot of water in the wintertime before. That's about as deep as I really like to fish, but usually that like 35 to 50 foot range is really good on these deeper, clear lakes. And you're not going to find a lot of these drains or ditches on the main lake that bottom out in 40 or 50 feet, except for maybe like at the very, very, very end. But I like to have ditches where I have a decent amount of water where those fish can move in. So this ditch, like right here, it starts at 90 feet and then eventually gets to 50 feet. But I feel like this one might be just a tiny bit too deep. And besides, I like to kind of be back in the creeks anyways. So I'm going to move into these creeks and try to find ditches that are in a little bit shallower water and I don't have to worry about being so deep. So like a ditch right here, this kind of, I don't know how good this would look in person, but it's like 50 foot and it comes into here. Maybe there's a little bit of a ditch there. It's kind of hard to tell. I've never fished this lake before. So I would just be going into all of these creeks, and I would be trying to find areas like the ones I just showed you. You kind of have to do a lot of map study at times to find these areas, and you have to mark them out because you're not going to find them all over the place. You're not just going to be able to run into these creeks at random and find good drains or ditches. You do need some good map study. This looks like a really good one right here, though. You can see creek channel, and it cuts in 50 foot in the center. That's a nice little drain or ditch. So I would be going through here, and I would be marking all these before I went to the lake, and then just graphing them and running as many as I can. Finally, let's take a look at a tiny little man-made lake. I just pulled a random lake up. I have no idea what lake this is, but I do want to show you that you can find these drains or ditches on these tiny lakes as well. I bet this is no more than half a mile long. And what you're looking for, again, is just a depression in the mouth of some pockets. So in this situation, you're going to have at least 3 or 4 ditches you can check out. One of them is going to be right here that feeds this pocket. It's basically just a creek that feeds this pocket. Another one right here, another one right here, and then you have one more right here. So you have these drains or ditches. Even this right here could be considered part of that drain or ditch. It's just basically because this lake is so small, everything is basically a drain or ditch. So these fish could be setting out even out here in the middle. But if you think about this as like a smaller version of a creek, you might even be able to find fish that are setting out here just in the dead middle of the lake relative to the size of the lake. So there could be fish sitting out here literally dead on the bottom. Not dead, they're going to be alive, but they're going to be sitting on the bottom of the lake way out here where the deepest point is, and this could be your ditch right here in theory. So you got to kind of change your perspective a little bit on these really small lakes, but if you think about it from what the lake sets up like, what it could look like, and picture this as like the back of a creek or something like that, a lot of times you can find a lot of fish out in these areas, and you might find that there's a school of 100 fish stacked up right in the dead middle of your lake. Keep on saying the word dead. The very center of your lake, and there's a pile of fish stacked up there. So definitely check out these types of areas, guys. Ditches and drains are super effective for finding numbers of fish. They're not the easiest areas to find. Again, you need to be pretty good with your electronics, and you need to spend a lot of time looking for them. But if you're fishing tournaments and you really want to get an advantage over your competition, these are the types of areas you want to fish. Or if you're just struggling to catch fish at all in the wintertime, put your time in on the water learning how to do this, because if you can figure it out on your lake, you're going to have a blast in the winter, even if it takes you a few trips to kind of figure it out. So definitely check out these areas. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a comment down below and like the video. We'll see you all next episode.